I'm standing in the hallway outside the courtroom, and I'm shaking so hard my teeth are chattering even though it's nearly 80 degrees. My husband Mark puts his hand on the small of my back, and I realize I've been holding my breath since the bailiff led her away. Convicted, on all counts. My mother is a convicted felon. She looked at me right before they cuffed her, really looked at me, the way she used to when I was a kid and disappointed her by getting a B in math. And she said, "How could you?" I found my voice somewhere in the pit of my stomach. "You tried to sell my son." She didn't flinch. She just shook her head like I was the one who'd broken something sacred, and then the officer turned her around and she was gone. I need to tell this from the beginning. I need to set it down in order because sometimes I still can't believe it happened, and I lived through every damn second of it. I was 24 when my father died. Cancer took him in 11 months, and I spent the last 3 of those months sleeping on a cot in his living room, so my mother wouldn't be alone. On one of the bad nights, the ones where the pain meds couldn't touch the ache in his bones, he grabbed my hand and pulled me close. "Promise me you'll look after your mom," he said. His voice was a dry whisper. "She's not as strong as she thinks she is." I promised. Of course I promised. I would have promised him the moon in that moment. Dad passed 2 days before Christmas. Mom organized the funeral like she was planning a dinner party, precise, composed, and quietly furious at anyone who tried to help. She wore a black dress I'd never seen before, and didn't cry once at the service. I thought that was strength. Now I think it was something else entirely. 2 years later, I was married to Mark, living 30 minutes from my mother, pregnant with our first child. My younger sister Casey had gotten engaged that same spring to a man named Darren, whose parents owned a chain of car dealerships. The wedding was set for June, a massive affair at a vineyard upstate, the kind of event that required a wedding planner, a social media hashtag, and a countdown calendar on my mother's refrigerator. Leo was born on March 28th, 3 months before the big day. A healthy, screaming, perfect boy. Mark and I were delirious with joy. I'd never known love like that, the kind that makes you terrified and invincible all at once. My mother came to the hospital. She held Leo for exactly 4 minutes, her arms stiff, her smile pasted on. When the nurse took him back, Mom looked at me and said, "You couldn't have planned this a little better, could you?" I laughed because I thought it was a joke. It wasn't. Over the next few weeks, the comments piled up. "Casey's been planning this for a year, you know." "People are going to be so distracted with the new baby, they won't even notice the centerpieces." Timing, sweetheart. Timing is everything in life. I was too sleep-deprived and blissed out to process it. Mark would raise an eyebrow when she left our house, mutter, "What's her deal?" And I'd shrug. Mom had always been dramatic. She'd lost my dad. She was stressed about the wedding. I gave her grace I shouldn't have. The last time I saw her before the world imploded, she stood in my nursery doorway while I rocked Leo to sleep. The room smelled like baby powder and the lavender sachets she'd brought over a week earlier. A surprising, thoughtful gesture. "He's so small," she said. "He's perfect," I corrected. She didn't answer. She just watched us with this faraway look, like she was calculating something. Then she smiled and said, "Get some rest, sweetheart. You look exhausted." 3 days later, my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. The number was unknown, and Leo had just finished a marathon feeding session that left me feeling like a deflated balloon. But something made me pick up. "Am I speaking with Sarah?" a woman's voice asked. "This is she." "Ms. Sarah, this is Dina from Bright Futures Adoption Services. I'm just calling to confirm our home visit for tomorrow afternoon as part of the finalization process for the placement of baby Leo." The world tilted. I remember staring at the mobile above Leo's crib, the little felt stars spinning in circles. "I'm sorry," I said. "I think you have the wrong number." "Oh, I don't think so. This is the contact number listed on the intake paperwork. Rosa Bishop, she's the child's maternal grandmother. She's been handling the case on behalf of the birth mother. She said you'd be expecting our call." My stomach dropped through the floor. Rosa Bishop. My mother. "Tell me everything," I whispered. Dina's voice shifted, suddenly cautious. Over the next 20 minutes, she laid out a story so insane I kept waiting for someone to tell me it was a prank. According to Bright Futures, my mother had contacted them 10 days after Leo's birth. She claimed that her daughter, me, was struggling with severe postpartum depression, financially unstable, and unwilling to care for the baby. She said I'd signed over temporary guardianship and wanted to place the child for a private adoption. She had notarized documents, forged as it turned out, giving her authority to act on my behalf. She'd interviewed prospective families, She'd chosen a couple. The adoptive parents were already emotionally attached. They'd been told they could take Leo home by the end of the month. This wasn't a fleeting thought. This was a plan. An elaborate, months-long plan that started while I was still pregnant, before Leo even took his first breath. I don't remember everything I said to Dina. I know I told her to stop everything, that I had never consented, that my mother had lied. I know she apologized profusely, her professional calm cracking into horror. I know I hung up the phone, and then I threw up in the kitchen sink. Mark came home 20 minutes later to find me on the floor, Leo in my arms, sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe. I managed to tell him. I watched his face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and then a rage so cold and quiet it scared me more than anything. "Call her," he said, his voice shaking. "Put her on speaker. I want to hear every word." I dialed my mother's number. She answered on the second ring, chipper as always. "Hi, sweetie. I was just thinking about you. How's my little guy?" "Mom," I said, "I need you to tell me about Bright Futures Adoption Services." Silence. The kind of silence that confirms everything. "Where did you hear that name?" she asked, her voice carefully even. "They called me. They called to schedule a home visit for the baby you're trying to adopt out from under me. Tell me it's not true. Please tell me you didn't do this." Another pause. And then, in a tone so casual it made my skin crawl, she said, "Oh, Sarah. Don't be dramatic. I was handling it." I drove to her house that night. Mark stayed home with Leo because I didn't want my son anywhere near that woman, and because Mark said if he saw her right then, he might do something that would land in a cell. I was still postpartum, still bleeding and leaking and running on 3 hours of sleep, but I had never been more clear-headed in my life. My mother opened the door in her satin robe, a glass of white wine in her hand like this was any other Tuesday. "You're being hysterical," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "I knew you would be. That's why I didn't tell you." "You didn't tell me because you knew I'd stop you," I said, my voice too calm. "You tried to give away my son." "I was finding him a good home," she corrected, settling onto her couch. "A stable home. Sarah, be reasonable. You're a new mother. You're exhausted. Your sister's wedding is in 2 months, and this family has been through enough. Casey deserves her moment. She deserves to have all of our focus on her for once. You had your wedding, you had your spotlight, now it's her turn." I literally could not process the words. "You're saying you tried to place my baby for adoption because you didn't want him to distract from Casey's—" "It's not just the wedding," she snapped, finally dropping the calm facade. "It's the whole year. This was supposed to be Casey's year. And then you go and get pregnant, completely thoughtlessly, and now everything is about you and the baby. The baby this, the baby that. The family can't have one thing that's just about your sister?" "He's a human being," I screamed. "He's not a party decoration. He's a newborn," she said, waving her hand. "He wouldn't even remember you. Babies are placed every day with loving families. You could visit. It's not like he'd be dead." The sheer callousness of that sentence knocked the air out of me. I stood there in her living room, the same living room where I'd promised my dying father I would take care of her, and I realized I was looking at a stranger. "You need to leave now," I said. My voice didn't even sound like mine. "Excuse me? This is my house." "I'm leaving then. But I want you to know something." I looked her dead in the eye. "I'm calling the police. You forged legal documents. You tried to commit fraud. You tried to take my child. You're going to answer for this." She laughed. Actually laughed. "Sarah, don't be ridiculous. The police won't get involved in a family misunderstanding. Besides, you promised your father you'd take care of me. What do you think he'd say if you put me through something like this over a little mistake?" There it was. The knife, twisted right into the wound she knew I carried. "He'd say," I whispered, "that you are not the woman he loved, and you never were." I walked out. She was still laughing when I slammed the door. The next 48 hours were a blur of police reports, forensic statements, and the slow, grinding machinery of the justice system. I handed over everything. The forged consent forms the adoption agency emailed me, the emails my mother had sent to the prospective parents posing as me, the voicemail she'd left after our fight telling me to stop being selfish and think of Casey for once. A detective named Lieutenant Warner, a gruff woman in her 50s with kind eyes and no patience for bullshit, sat across from me in my kitchen and said, "I want you to understand something, Mrs. O'Brien. What your mother did isn't just a family squabble. It's attempted kidnapping, fraud, forgery, identity theft, and conspiracy. These are felonies. This is serious prison time." "Good," I said. Mark held my hands so tight I lost feeling in my fingers. They arrested her at home 2 days later. My cousin texted me a photo someone had snapped. My mother in handcuffs, still in that same satin robe, her hair a mess, her face twisted with outrage. The photo made its way onto social media within hours. You want to talk about the highlight of the year? The arrest of Rosa Bishop at 58 years old for trying to sell her grandson on the black market. Unofficial, but that's how people spun it. Became the talk of the town, the scandal of the county. The story that got picked up by local news and then went viral on a slow news day. Casey's wedding hashtag, carefully curated for a year, got buried under comments like, "Isn't your mom the one who tried to kidnap a baby?" And, "So is the open bar going to have prison wine?" Casey called me the night of the arrest, sobbing. "How could you do this to her? My wedding is in 6 weeks." "She tried to give my son to strangers," I said. "Are you serious right now?" "It was a mistake. She was stressed." "You know how she gets when she's stressed. We could have handled this privately, as a family. You didn't have to involve the family she tried to destroy." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Casey, if you say one more word defending her, I will never speak to you again." "Sarah, I mean it. She forged my signature. She interviewed families. She picked out new parents for my baby because she was worried your centerpieces wouldn't get enough likes on Instagram. That's not a mistake. That's evil." She hung up on me. I blocked her number. I blocked her on everything. The wedding happened without me. From what I heard, my mother couldn't attend either. She was out on bail, under a strict no-contact order, and the bridal party had to do last-minute damage control to keep the photographers away from the courthouse paparazzi. "So, Mom, you didn't want my baby to be the highlight of the year? Congratulations. Your arrest mugshot got more engagement than Casey's first dance. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I testified 4 times. Every time I walked past the defense table, my mother would look at me with this wounded, pleading expression, like was the one on trial. Her lawyer tried every angle. She was a grieving widow, a stressed mother of the bride, a concerned grandmother who'd made a tragic error in judgment. He brought up my father's death. He brought up my unstable emotional state postpartum. He tried to paint me as a spiteful daughter with a grudge. Then the prosecution put the forged documents on the overhead projector. They played the voicemail. They put Dina from Bright Futures on the stand, who broke down describing how she'd almost handed a newborn to strangers because of my mother's lies. The adoptive parents testified. They were traumatized, deceived, emotionally destroyed. The jury saw it all. The verdict came back in 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Sentencing happened a month later. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair and no visible patience for rich suburban lady theatrics, gave her 3 years in state prison, with an additional 5 years of probation. Given her age and the severity of the charges, it was more mercy than I expected, but less than her lawyer begged for. Before she was led away, my mother turned to me one last time. The cameras were gone, the courtroom mostly empty. It was just us and the bailiff. "I raised you," she said, her voice cracking. "I gave you everything. You promised your father you would take care of me, and now you've ruined my life over a little administrative error. I hope you're happy." "I didn't ruin your life," I said, standing up. "You tried to erase my son's. You just have to live with the consequences." She started to cry, real tears, probably the first I'd ever seen, and I walked out without looking back. 3 weeks after she was transferred to the correctional facility, the letters started. Pristine stationery, looping handwriting, absolutely zero acknowledgement of what she'd done. I burned that letter in the backyard while Mark grilled burgers. It felt cathartic. A week later, a call came through her lawyer. She wanted me to write a character letter for her appeal. She wanted me to tell the court she was a good woman who'd just made a mistake, that she'd been under incredible stress, that family forgives family. She wanted me to her. I told the lawyer exactly where he could file that request. Then the flying monkeys descended. My Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, called me on a Tuesday afternoon. "Sarah, honey, I know this has been hard, but we really need to talk about your mother." "Do we?" "She made a little mistake, sweetheart. A poor decision. But she's family. You can't just abandon her in her time of need. She's an old woman. Prison will kill her." "She tried to put my newborn up for adoption without my knowledge or consent," I said, enunciating every word. "She chose a couple. She forged legal documents. She lied to an agency, to a family, to everyone. If I hadn't gotten that phone call, my son would be with strangers right now, and I'd have no legal recourse. That's not a little mistake." That's a felony. She's a convicted felon, Aunt Linda. She's exactly where she belongs. You're being so cruel, Linda whispered. After all she did for you. What did she do for me? Feed me? House me? That's called parenting. That's the bare minimum. It doesn't buy her the right to traffic my child. I took a breath. If you think what she did was a little mistake, then you can join her on my blocked list. Don't call me again. I hung up. I blocked Linda. I blocked my cousin who'd been sharing passive-aggressive Facebook posts about forgiveness and moving on as a family. I blocked every single person who suggested, even for a second, that I owed that woman anything. Leo turns 2 in a few weeks. He has Mark's smile and my stubbornness, and he's the absolute center of our world. He doesn't know what happened. One day I'll have to tell him, in words he can understand, what his grandmother tried to do. But that day isn't today. Casey got divorced 18 months after the wedding. The marriage imploded under the weight of the scandal, and 1,000 other cracks I suspect were always there. She reached out once cautiously, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't look at her without seeing the girl who told me I was ruining her wedding by keeping my child. That's not a sister. That's a stranger. My mother is still in prison. She'll be eligible for parole next year, and I've already been told her lawyer will reach out to me again as a victim impact statement becomes relevant. I'll write one. I'll tell the parole board exactly what this woman did and exactly how dangerous she remains. Some nights I lie awake and think about my father. I think about that promise I made in the dark years ago, when I was so young and so desperate to give a dying man peace. I used to think I'd broken it, but now I understand something my younger self couldn't grasp. The woman I promised to care for doesn't exist. Maybe she never did. My father loved a version of her I never had the chance to know. Or maybe he loved the mask she wore so well. The woman who sits in a cell tonight is not the woman he asked me to protect. She's a person who looked at my newborn son and saw an obstacle. In trying to erase my baby's future, she erased herself from ours. I look at Leo, sleeping in his crib with one arm flung out and his little mouth slightly open, and I feel a peace I didn't know I was capable of. My mother wanted the year to belong to my sister's wedding. Instead, it belongs to her arrest, her trial, her sentence. The year I became a mother is also the year I buried my own. And I'm okay with that. I'm so much more than okay. The highlight of the year, Mom? It's the sound of that cell door closing behind you. That's the memory I'll carry forever.